for them. Speaking of fresh faces, we're going to keep going down the line because we talked about it off camera, how this team is getting a little bit disrespected and they're the Super Bowl champions, so we kind of don't understand why. But they go and make a good trade at receiver after presumably not bringing OBJ back. Hasn't signed with anybody else, but it's pretty clear he's not going to sign back with the Rams. At least it's, pretty, that's where it's headed. But they go and trade for Allen Robinson, then sign him to a 3-year, $46.5 million deal. And you want to talk about not having consistency in your career. Let's just list off the starting quarterbacks of Allen Robinson's career. And remember, he's still a good receiver. First two, Matt McGloin and Christian Hackenberg. That's at Penn State. So that he actually got a good Christian Hackenberg.
My quick take on Christian Hackenberg at Penn State is people only thought he was good is because he had Allen Robinson. Right when Allen Robinson left, Hackenberg collapsed.
True. So maybe he made Christian Hackenberg. Then we start getting to the nitty gritty. 2014 through 2016, goes and plays with Blake Bortles down there in Jacksonville. 2017 gets hurt. 2018 is now going to the Bears, has Mitchell Trubisky through 2018, 2019, has Nick Foles for 2020, and then has a rookie Justin Fields and half of Andy Dalton year in 2021 for the Bears. Never really had an upper echelon quarterback. Like, that's just scary. That's a scary list.
Like, I'm sure if you show him that list, like when he was a rookie, that's something you wake up in cold sweats about. Like, oh, it was just a nightmare. Oh, thank goodness.
That's like I thought I wasted my career before he had Kurt Warner.
Well, this is actually it's a very good comparison. But as you were saying,
no, I'm just you could take it from there because like you just have to remember that we're not talking about a receiver who hasn't done anything in the league. We're talking about a receiver who is still looked at to be, upper half of receivers in the league, almost Pro Bowl, and now the Rams get a weapon.
Yeah, this is honestly like for a team that somehow is capped out. They have no picks. Oh, yeah, no, we'll just add whoever we want for whatever price tag we want. We can do it. Right. Somehow they keep adding these guys that improve their team. So, like, you talk about disrespect. I think, like, the viewpoint on them is that, they're the same team that they were last year. Honestly, they probably lose some of the rotational pieces that made them a really deep team. But up top, you had Allen Robinson, and granted, you lose Robert Woods, and maybe lose OBJ. We're not sure about that yet. Probably looking that way, as you said.
Well, and ACL tear in the Super Bowl, he'd be out for a long time anyway.
Right. He would be out regardless. And now you had Allen Robinson, who, I mean, arguably, like he has seen really high highs in his career already with those lists of quarterback, that awful list of quarterbacks that you put out. I think in his second year with Blake Bortles, he led the league in receiving touchdowns. And before last year with a really putrid Bears team, he averaged about 1,200 yards per year. So, I mean, to say he's anything other than a wide receiver one, which on this team he probably won't be because of Cooper Kupp, but like, just in terms of overall NFL status, this guy is really, really good. And I don't think enough people are recognizing how big of a move this is.
Well, I think he seamlessly steps into the role that Robert Woods is. And let's remember that offense, Sean McVay had Robert Woods before the injury, almost like having the same production, if not better than Cooper Kupp to start the season, was going crazy. And I think it's perfect for him because Cooper Kupp is such a dynamic wide receiver. He does everything in that offense. He'll run the jet sweeps. He'll be in tight. He'll be out wide. He'll run every route in the book. But I think you benefit from being a number two to that because a number two can just be a steady receiver. You run these 5 or 6 routes in the tree. You play on this side of the football. We ask you to do not a lot of things really well, and Cooper Kupp does everything really well. And I think if Allen Robinson steps into that kind of steady role, because like we just talked about his career, nothing was steady around him, but yet he's doing well. Now give him steadiness, a steady role, a steady diet, steady coach, steady team. And, I think he gets right back on track to that averaging 1,200 yards a season. And the fact that he's done that with a combination of, Blake Bortles and Nick Foles and Andy Dalton and Mitch Trubisky is wild to me. Like, it's truly a testament to how good Allen Robinson can be in the league.
Allen Robinson, it's a tragedy that the year he got hurt was the one year that the Jaguars made the playoffs, too.
Yeah, right.
The only time he's made the playoffs, he got double doinked.
Yeah, you make a really actually good point about him now having steadiness around him. You know who that reminds me of? we were talking about it last year around the same time.
Matt Stafford.
His teammate Matt Stafford finally
yeah.
getting a solid team that isn't the Detroit Lions to play on, and we saw what happened. So ultimately, I think it's a really good signing. Now, I think what the calculus, the math comes down to for do they get better is compare him to their de facto wide receiver 2, which is actually a combination of 2 people. It was Robert Woods until he got hurt, and then they brought in OBJ. It actually adds up to 16 games played. In 16 games played, you combine both of their stats. Here's what wide receiver 2 looks like. 72 catches, 860 yards, 9 touchdowns in 16 games. Obviously, he'll be playing 17. So you can maybe beef him up a little bit. Does Allen Robinson go over or under those numbers, and where over or under? I mean, if you think it's less yards, more catches, whatever.
I think the catches goes down a little bit. 72 catches in 16 games, not bad, man. You get some targets. That's not bad. So I think the catches goes down. I think the yards we can probably pin him in for the run, because that's a down the field offense. That's an offense that sees a lot of volume in the passing game. Matt Stafford's going to throw that thing 35 to 40 times a game. So the yards will be there. I'm iffy about the 9 touchdowns. I think if we see 9 touchdowns, we're like, hey, yo, Allen Robb is here, but it's not out of the question.
Right.
But that is a high total for a wide receiver 2, about to touch double digits in touchdowns. So
you say less yards or less catches and touchdowns, but more yards, right? Is where you say
around the same amount of yards, if not a little bit more, but not more less catches than touchdowns, if that makes sense. I could see around the 7-8 range for touchdowns, but maybe in the 65 range for catches.
Right. Matt, how about you?
I think it's slightly under all of them. I think he gets around like 60-ish catches for 740 yards and like 6 or 7 touchdowns.
Only 700 yards. I could see the Rams having 2 1,000-yard receivers. They were going to last year if Robert Woods didn't get hurt. Cooper Kupp was still going to do his thing, and Rob Woods was going for like 1,250. Like they were about to have 2,000-yard receivers.
I just if I were I don't 861's a high number, so maybe it's 800. I think for a number 2, for the person who's getting the second most receiving yards on the team.
Well, I mean, it's not unheard of. We had 3 or 4 teams have 2,000-yard receivers last year.
Yeah, I know, but it's still unusual. And Robinson, he's been injured a little bit. And last year, he didn't have a great yards per game. I know he's only 20. He's still in his late 20s, so it's not like he's old.
And who was throwing him the ball? And
Justin Fields. I know Justin Fields couldn't throw last year because there was no offensive line. But he hasn't had, just for the touchdowns, which he hasn't had that many touchdowns since he had 14 in 2015. So I like before the whole AJ Brown trade happened, I really wanted the Eagles to get Allen Robinson. I thought it'd be a really good compliment. So I'm not down on Allen Robinson. I'm just slightly under. It's no disrespect.
So here is why I think both of you are wrong. And I think there is one true answer that we're going to find out here. And it's going to be that he is going to go over all of these. Maybe not touchdowns. Touchdowns is pretty high. I think he can get close to 8 or 9 touchdowns. I project him. But
you think he's getting over 72 catches?
And here's why. Cooper Kupp saw 191 targets. 191 targets in a year, and 145 catches. He's catching 76% of them, right? And then he's also going for 16 touchdowns, almost 2,000 yards.
He didn't catch 145 balls. He didn't catch 145.
Something crazy like that, right? Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't make
146 and he didn't break it. So
that's ridiculous.
Doesn't no. He made 145 is the answer, but it is insane to think. Maybe it will happen. Maybe crazy things do happen. Maybe Cooper Kupp will have this year again. But more than likely, teams are going to slide some more people Cooper Kupp's way. Down a little bit. And you're going to see some red zone looks for Allen Robinson, and you're also going to see a lot of single coverage. I imagine he'll get around these stats, if not a little better, if they still are that top echelon team.
That's true. And that was going to be my next point after that. It's not just about the player Allen Robinson is. Like Matt Stafford's case, it's the team he's going to. This is a coach in Sean McVay who loves to utilize his weapons and has a very good idea of what that number 2 receiver can do. And You know, I just think when you have a sure-handed receiver like Allen Robinson, I mean, we talked about all this turmoil around him, and he didn't waver. Any guy who can not waver with all that change and all that inadequacy around him shows me that when he goes to a team that has the foundation, he's gonna hit the ground running.
Yeah.
So I think Allen Robinson is prime for that. And Penn State boy, got to shout out for my Penn State boy. All right.